Okay, I did it.
All right. So, welcome to the New England Mosaic Society's second webinar presentation, How I Made a 3D Sculpture Mosaic Quilt Garden Bed. And I'm very pleased to welcome Carol Krensman, who is a NEMS member herself. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her mosaic background, and then we will let her proceed through her slides. Carol?
Okay, all right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. And, okay, hold on one second. Okay, so this is a little bit about what's going on for me right now. I have been creating things with stained glass and mosaics since 2000. And I teach mosaics at my home studio in Natick, and also at a middle school in Framingham. And right now I'm working on a large public art mosaic that'll be installed soon. We just finished grouting it on Saturday. And I'm going to be grouting another piece for the church, a church in Natick, on this coming Saturday. And then I'm excited to say that I made a submission to the Edward M. Kennedy Institute in collaboration with two other artists to be part of the Seat at the Table exhibit this summer, which will go in there in June. And I'll be doing a mosaic in the seat of a chair as part of that exhibit. So now I'm going to start talking about my process for learning about the bed. And the first thing I did was go to Tennessee, and I studied with Sherry Warner Hunter 2 summers in a row, or 2 years in a row. And that's her in the middle creating I think it's a bunny rabbit. And when I left there the first time, I had the form for the turtle in the upper right. And I brought it home, and I didn't do anything with it for a while. And then the next time I was there, I made the bird in the bird bath that's in the lower right. But again, I didn't do anything to it for a while, but I brought them home. And what I did do was create a mailbox, which is the one on the left. And that's out in front of my house. And I didn't exactly do Sherry's technique, and unfortunately it got vandalized. So 3 times I had to fix it, and then I couldn't fix it. And then the 4 pictures in the middle on the bottom are the concrete mailbox that I made that has now been up for quite a while, and nobody has touched it, and it's got some mosaics on it. And then I finally got to do my turtle and my bird bath. So those are the sculptural mosaics that I had done up to that point. And then I have grandchildren. And I was making some fabric quilts for my granddaughters and about to make one for my grandson. And then I thought to myself, why shouldn't I make a tile quilt? So I had, in the upper right corner, you can see there's a public art mosaic that I did in Natick Center. And I used 2-inch glass tiles to make that mosaic. And I had a lot of 2-inch tiles left over. So I thought, oh, those would be kind of good for a quilt. So I started playing with my 2-inch tiles, and I realized that if I put 9 tiles together, they would make a typical quilt pattern called a 9-patch. And I had read a lot of the Elm Creek novels by Jennifer Shiverini, and I got some of her pattern books, and I started to look through them and see which ones I could do in tile. And then I just started drawing the different patterns that would work and the colors I had. And I ended up with 132 squares that would fit over the form I wanted to make. And there were about 59 different patterns. So there were some new patterns that I designed, and some patterns that were old-fashioned, even from Underground Railroad days. So I had fun learning about quilt squares. So now that I had the pattern, I had to figure out what to do next. And on the bottom left there, those are two of my test 9-patch designs. So once I had drawn the design, I knew what I wanted, then I had to organize all my tiles, and I put them all in little trays. So each one of these little trays has about 9 or 10 tiles in it that corresponds to, I think I had numbers across and letters down on that grid, and I labeled everything so I would know which tiles would go where, and I had them all organized in their full size, the 2-inch size. And then I had to start thinking about cutting them. So what I decided to do was cut them out by color. And as I was cutting, I realized that I had to have a border around each square so it would look more like a quilt. So I ended up cutting my 2-inch squares in half and using 3 on each side to make the border. And I taped all my squares together individually. So each 9-patch is taped, and then like the ones in the upper left and upper right corner, they're taped like that. And then I just took some pictures of them pushed together so that I could get an idea of what they look like together. And then I realized that if I really ever wanted to see my quilt, my tile quilt, out flat, I would have to lay it out on the floor. So I put down a big sheet and I laid it out on the floor and took some pictures. That's my grandson lying down on there. And I realized that was the only time I was ever going to see it out flat like that, because once it was a mosaic, I would never be able to lay it flat again. So I had fun seeing actually how big it was. And once I realized the size of it, I brought up some brown paper and made a brown paper pattern that would match the exact size of that laid out flat quilt. So I would know what size I needed to carve my foam. And then I was doing all that sort of in the cold months. And then when it warmed up, I went outside to start carving the foam base. So what I had was 2 blocks of EPS, expanded polystyrene foam blocks that were 2 feet by 4 feet. And if you look at the middle picture, what that is that's a whole block right there in the middle. And then I cut the other block into quarters and put it on the sides to create the drapes of the quilt. And on the lower right corner, you can see that brown paper pattern. Whoops, sorry. The brown paper pattern that's draped over the foam. So I kept putting that paper on and taking it off and putting it on and taking it off because I had done so much work to get all those squares, and I didn't want to end up with the quilt being draped in a way that I would lose some of the squares in the fold. So I used that paper to help me make the folds as big as I could so that I would get all my squares on there. So I attached the pieces, I carved, I brushed in the middle there. You can see there's a metal brush, and that's a way of carving the foam. And I used hot knives and a bow, a hot bow, and a little saw, and I just kept going at it until I sort of got to the shape I wanted. And then in the upper right corner, you can see that's one of the squares that I sort of pinned in place just to see how it would fit onto the fold as I was moving along making those folds. Then once it was the size I wanted and the shape I wanted, I turned it over and started to cover it with alkali resistant mesh and pushed in roofing nails. And the roofing nails are used because they have a very fat head, and pushing them into foam is is simple because it's foam, so they go in very easily, and it's not hard to get them in at all. And they basically just hold the mesh in place. And I got it all covered. On the left side, we were making a hole and inserting a metal leg in case I was going to need it for installation into concrete or something, but I didn't end up needing that. But it's something to think about if you're making a large sculpture, is where is it going to be installed, and how's it going to be secure. So you need to have some way to attach legs if it's going to be outdoors or something, so it doesn't walk away. And we worked hard on the outside, and we got all that mesh on and all the roofing nails. And then I began to put the slurry and concrete on. So in this technique, I mixed slurry, which is a combination of just cement and water and a little bit of polymer additive. And that's, some people call it milk because it's a white liquid, and it helps to strengthen the concrete. And so the slurry is very watery. It's not thick at all, and it's applied with a brush. You can see I'm using a brush in the bottom right corner there. And once and by the way, I'm obviously wearing gloves and a mask and face protection also through the whole process, and an apron. And once the slurry is on, then I mixed up the concrete. So the difference between slurry and concrete is that there's an aggregate in the concrete, and the aggregate is, in this case, sand, and it makes the whole mixture thicker, and you can manipulate it more with your hand. It's kind of more the thickness of grout. And so where the slurry gets spread with a brush, the concrete gets spread with your hand. So I put the slurry all over the base, and then I put concrete over that, and then I recovered it. You can see in the upper right, I'm recovering the part that's already got concrete on it with another layer of mesh. So after the first layer is dry, then I had to put on another layer of mesh and slurry and concrete. And then when that was dry, I put on a third layer of mesh, slurry, and concrete. So it takes a while to get all those layers on and dry. But when that finally happened, in the upper left corner, you can see I had some help to turn it over. And before I turned it over, I realized I was going to need a way to move it because it was getting big and heavy. So I don't know if you can see in any of these pictures, but I built just a black plywood platform with wheels to put it on so that I could move it around and push it and change position or whatever I needed to do with it while I was working. So also, I don't know if you noticed, but in this picture, in the upper left, the whole thing is covered with clear plastic. So that's important when concrete is drying because it dries from the inside out. It has to be kept moist. You don't want it to dry out too fast from the outside, so you need to keep it covered with plastic while it's drying, which is kind of counterintuitive, but that's what you have to do. So now I'm doing the mesh, the slurry, and the concrete again. And in the upper right, I'm just laid out 2 strips of the tiles put together, just so, again, I could sort of test and see how they were fitting. And I had to make the upper part that goes over the pillow, that was 1 or 2 tiles longer than the lower part because I had to go up and over that pillow and back down the other side. And now all along the bottom here, what we're doing is, again, a total of 3 layers of mesh, slurry, and concrete, and covering it in between. In the second picture over on the right, you can see I'm actually applying the concrete by hand with gloves on. And even after you put on your concrete and you go to put your next layer of mesh on, you still have to push through the mesh with the roofing nails. And that might seem like it's going to be hard to do because there's already concrete there, but it turns out it's not too bad. The roofing nails are kind of sharp and you can just get right through that concrete. So by the time I was done with 3 layers of mesh, slurry, and concrete, there was a lot of roofing nails in the bed. So finally in August, I got to start to do the tiling, and I was sitting on the floor in the garage and I was putting on the lower left, you can see it's, that's the size of the 2-inch tiles, and they fit really pretty good right there. And then one thing I didn't realize until I started to work was that underneath those points of the quilt that hung down at an angle, there was also a mesh and concrete. So I ended up tiling under there also. And I couldn't really see what I was doing because it was down so low. So all the way to the bottom right picture, that's a mirror in my lap so that I can look up and see where I'm tiling, because I couldn't figure out how to get my body in that position to get under there. And so I mixed up thin set, just small amounts at a time, and we individually buttered each tile and put it onto the form. So then I started adhering all my squares. And when I started doing that, remember I had said that my squares were all taped together, and I thought I was just going to be able to thin set the back of the whole quilt square and put it on, but it just wasn't working out. I'm not sure exactly why, but there was too much thin set coming up between the tiles and the concrete. Even though it felt to me like I was putting it on nice and evenly, there was probably some bumps, and so I ended up having to take the tape off of all the quilt squares and just laying the tiles out. So in the upper right there, I managed to find a square paper plate, and the tile quilt square fit right in there. So it kept all my squares organized really nicely, and I ended up individually buttering each piece of tile for each square. And you know, I had help once in a while, and then I didn't have help sometimes too. So the way I started was straight down the middle, across, and from the pillow down to the bottom. And then I went wider on the sides, and then I went wider on the top. And I just kept increasing all around, basically on the top, and a little bit of the drape on the sides with the tile. But then as I got down to the corners of the quilt, I was going over a lot of curves, and I had not anticipated how much cutting I was going to have to do to get over those curves. So in the upper right, you can see that dark blue triangle with all those cuts going across that I didn't know I was going to have to do. And there are lots of little cuts. Everywhere where there was a curve, I had to cut, because the 2-inch glass tiles were flat, and I had to get them to be able to move around the edges. And I pretty much was able to keep all my squares. There was only 1 or 2 that I had to sort of fudge a little smaller in the deep creases. But every single square is on there in some shape or form. So that was very exciting. And then I cleaned it up a little bit, and then I got to grout. And grouting was so easy because it was flat, low tile, and I grouted the top, the whole top of the quilt one day, and I grouted the beds, what I call the bed skirt, another day. And I did I did grout the skirt a little bit darker gray than the top, and I grouted the top with kind of a light gray. And in the lower right picture, you can see the black platform. I painted the plywood black on that platform so that it wouldn't show that much under the bed. And I got to finish grouting it. And then it was done. And I had a goal because I'm part of the Natick Artists Open Studios, and we have every year an exhibit in our library for September and October. And then our weekend of open studios is usually in the middle of October. So I had the goal of getting done before our weekend of open studios. So there it was, October 17th, and that weekend was our open studios. And I ended up having my landscaper come over with a couple of helpers, and then a couple of neighbors came, and another sculptor came, and we were struggling to try to figure out how to get it from my house down to the library in Natick Center, which is it's less than 2 miles away, but we didn't really know how to get it there. So we ended up figuring out that we needed a whole lot of 2x4s, and I think one of the men actually ran out to Home Depot and got the 2x4s and came back, and they used the 2x4s underneath the wooden platform to lift the bed. They rolled it as far as they could up to the trailer, but then they had to lift it to get up onto the trailer. And in the lower left corner, you can see they had to do that again. They had to lift it to get down off the truck when we got down to the library. And then we had bought 3 or 4 pieces of masonite. That's the brown that you're seeing underneath the bed. And we used that so that we could wheel the bed up the ramp at the library. And we kept moving the pieces of masonite forward. We'd roll onto 2, take the back one off and move it to the front, and continue that way until we got it up into the library. And finally, we got it through the front door. That's on the far right lower picture there. And there it was in the lobby of the library. It stayed there for about 6 months. Those are my daughters and my grandkids in the lower right. And I made a poster that had the names of all the quilt squares, and also, a couple of the slides that you've just seen so people could read about how it got made. And I had that on display next to the bed. And it was the winter that was very, very snowy. So I had a good excuse to leave it in the library longer, and I didn't have to move it that soon. So these are just some things that people ask, and I've not actually weighed it, but I think it's about 500 pounds because of all this other stuff that went into it to make it that would add up to about that. And I can't move it myself, certainly. And it took me, it took me about 9 months because I started in January and it got finished in October. So there was a lot of cement, a lot of sand, all those nails, the mesh, the foam, everything has weight. And then in the upper right corner is where we wheeled the bed out of the library once all the snow had melted. And again, my landscaper came. This time, if you look at the second picture on the upper picture from the left, there's now a different platform for it to sit on with bigger wheels. So that was something I learned. The wheels that I had put under the black platform were too little, and some of them actually broke off while we were pushing it up the ramp to get into the library. So I now know when something weighs that much, I need bigger, stronger wheels. So we moved it onto put a piece of masonite down in my yard and moved it onto the stronger platform. And then in the far right upper picture, my landscapers made a little bed. Well, that's funny, a bed for the bed out of concrete block. And then it took a while, but finally in July, they placed it on the bed. And so that's where it is. And it's been there ever since. So that's it. Thank you for listening, and I'm ready for questions.
Okay. Could you go into participants again, and go down to Emily and unmute her again?
Yeah. Unmute her?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I had to log out and log in again, which meant that I lost the initial chat. But if anybody has questions, you can type them into the chat box and I can ask Carol. In the meantime, that was great. I really appreciate everything you told us. And I have a couple of questions while we wait for others.
Okay.
One is, did you have a certain amount of time that you waited between each of the concrete layers in order to let it cure initially?
I didn't have a specific time. It was a visual thing. When the concrete first goes on and the slurry, it looks wet. I mean, it's like a dark brown. And then as it dries, it turns more grayish. So I would wait for that change. So it was a visual change. It was not, I didn't know how long it was going to take. And I think it's most likely weather dependent. You know, if there's been a lot of hot days, maybe it dries faster than if there's been a lot of cold days. I'm not that knowledgeable about concrete, so I don't really know. But I just waited until it looked dry to me.
Okay, that's really helpful. And I heard you say, and I saw the pictures of your careful protection of your face and your eyes and your hands while you were working with the concrete. I wonder, after the concrete was mixed, what is the danger that you were protecting yourself from with the mask?
I'm pretty sure that you can burn your skin when you physically handle concrete.
Okay, so it wasn't particles that you were worried about breathing. It was just
no, not at that point. I was worried more about physically touching it with my skin, and also possible splashback. You know, especially with the slurry. Could it, while I was brushing it on, could it splash back in my face? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I was just, better be safe than sorry mode.
Okay, so I'm not sure if I'm not seeing the right chat box now, but I don't see any questions in it. Is that because people don't have questions? Or Amy, could you click into your chat box and see if I'm missing things?
I don't think you are. I don't see any questions.
Okay, so I want you all to think for a moment about either a project you have in mind, a project that this inspires, and think about what it would really entail, because you have Carol, the expert, on the line now. Okay, and we have a question coming in. Thank you, Cassie. The question is, Carol, can you explain a little bit about adding legs to the bottom to securely install a sculpture? I'll be installing a sculpture soon and need to secure it to the ground.
Again, I'm not an expert on that, but the class I took with Sherry, she implants that kind of metal that looks like an L. It's long, tall piece of metal with holes in it. And she implants it into the foam and glues it and cements it, but leaves a hole around it so that if you have to install it in an outdoor place, like in a bed of concrete, you can attach what you have sticking out to what goes into the concrete with nuts and bolts, because there's holes in the metal. Is that answering the question?
Okay, that's great. I'm not sure what you meant by space around it? Around the leg?
Well, the leg that you put in the bottom, like for me, in the bottom of the bed, I have to be able to reach and connect another piece of metal to it, because it's not sticking out. Some people could make it sticking out, and then you wouldn't have that issue, but mine was not sticking out because I was not sure if I was ever gonna be embedding it somewhere or just sitting it flat. And I ended up just sitting it flat. So my initial one was not sticking out. If you have it sticking out, then you don't have to worry about space around it. But then whatever platform you put it on, you have to make sure your legs are not hitting your platform while you're working.
Okay, thank you. And Cassie says that's great, thanks. So I had another question, which is, have you, in the years since you made it, have you had any deterioration on it?
I have had a couple of tiles drop off from the bed skirt area.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they just dropped off and fell straight down, and then I went out and put thinset on them and just put them back, and they've been fine ever since. So there probably is always, with an outdoor mosaic, a need to be aware of the possibility of maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly there's cleaning. I actually just was out there yesterday and I noticed that it looked kind of a little dirty, and I scrubbed it with a sort of a rough sponge and vinegar. And I think there's a lot of moss in my yard. So there wasn't actually moss, but there was maybe like brownish, greenish algae or something like that. But it came right off, and so it looks all clean again now.
Great. All right, so I was also, okay, we have a question from Cecilia about what type of grout you used.
I used Laticrete, and that's rated for outdoor installations.
Wonderful. And I was wondering if you could talk for just a minute about the community's response to it. Since it was in the library and public for 6 months, did you hear any response? Did you have any feedback?
Well, everybody's first response was, why is there a bed in the library? And so everybody was tricked by it because they thought it was actually a fabric quilt. Like, people literally thought it was fabric for a long time. And then if I happened to be in the library when they were there, I'd be like, no, go touch it. It's tile. It's not fabric. And so that was one reaction. And then of course people loved it. And when it was gone, they're like, what happened to the bed? So people loved seeing it and having it there. It was overall very, positive reaction.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah.
So for the others on the webinar, do you have any technical questions for Carol? Any philosophical questions? Any questions about additional inspiration for the project? Anything that you want to use this last few minutes for?
Well, I can tell one other funny story if nobody has a question, but if there's a question, I'll wait. But when I was trying to scope out the space at the library has 2 double doors that open onto 2 double doors. And after the second set of double doors, there was this sort of scanner in the middle of the floor that was, I think, to make sure people weren't taking books without checking them out. And when I checked out the space for how I was going to get the bed in there, which I highly recommend, don't start your project until you know how it's going to fit where you're putting it. I said to them, is there any way we can remove it just for that day when I'm delivering the bed? And they said the next thing I knew, they had taken it out because the librarian said to me, oh, that thing, it hasn't worked for years anyway. And they ended up taking it out, and they were so happy that it was gone because it kind of stopped the flow of traffic going in and out, and it just made the whole space feel more expansive. So it was a happy thing that happened when I asked.
I like that story because it means that you improved that space in two ways, by putting your art there and by permanently making it better flow.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So,
all right, well, I don't see any other questions, and we're 2 minutes from the end of our webinar time. So I think I'll turn it back over to Amy and
Okay.
see, and see whether she has closing comments. I also just noticed that we have one other comment on here, which is that someone's wondering how you came up with the idea of actually making it a bed for the garden.
well, the main way was because I was making quilts for my grandchildren, and then I had 2-inch tiles, glass tiles left from my other project, and it just all clicked in my brain, like, why don't I just make a quilt out of tile? And then I had to make something big enough for them to, all those squares to fit on. So it just happened.
That makes sense.
How do we get ideas? I don't know.
It's nice to have to articulate it sometimes. So I'll say my thank you. And then Amy, do you have anything that you'd like to say in closing?
Yes, I do. Again, my thanks, Carol.
You're very welcome.
We're in the process of planning at least 2 additional webinars for the rest of the year. And so once we've secured our speakers, we will send out an email. I hope you will be able to join us. And I have one more request of Carol. If you could go and make me the host, that would be great.
Okay.
Click more.
All right, wait a second. I have to get back to your name, right?
Yes.
Make host.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
everybody. See you soon.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, Carol.
Okay, bye-bye.